Hello, everyone. I am Thais Skogstad, and I would like to welcome you to this month webinar. You know that each month Data.World hosts a webinar focused on topics that are top of mind for data and analytics leaders like yourself. This month, we are discussing ways to use data lineage to solve complex data management problems. We are joined by two data experts, Tim Gasper, Director of Product Management here at Data.World, and Ernie Ostek, the SVP of Products at Manta. We will discuss how data lineage can speed time to insights for impact analysis, troubleshooting, root cause analysis, forecasting, and more. Before we dive in, you probably makes sense to quickly give you information on who we are. As the only cloud-native catalog recognized in Gartner's 2019 Magic Quadrant for Metadata Management Solutions, Data.World offers a new way to multiply business value from data very fast. We help connect, align, and get more value from the intelligence, tools, and processes powering your business. Our cloud-native platform creates a single clean view of your data from multiple sources so more people in the business can find, understand, and use data no matter where it lives or what format it is in. Built to include more of your business, Data.World makes data from anywhere meaningful to anyone. So your people can quickly and confidently answer business questions, capture their work, and add it out to your company's body of knowledge. And when your data strategy needs to adapt to emerging requirements, knowing what data you have, where it lives, and how it's used goes a long way towards successful compliance. But why data lineage? According to Forrester, by 2021, insight-driven organizations will take away about $1.8 trillion from their less informed peers. These organizations will also be 23 times more likely to acquire customers than the other people in their space. Keep in mind that only about 37 of all data generated this year to 2020 will have the potential for good analysis. With these stats in mind, data lineage could not be more relevant than now. Gartner also says that end-to-end lineage provides visibility into data sources and provides a history of transformations impacting that data. Data lineage gives us a clear understanding of our data, which in the end results in better insights and analysis. Now, you know that data is crucial to every organization's survival. For that reason, business must think about the flow of data across multiple systems that fuel organizations' decision-making. For example, a marketing department uses demographics and customer behavior to forecast sales. A CEO needs to make decisions based on the performance and growth statistics. An understanding of the data origins and history will help answer questions such as how the report tables and columns are defined in the metadata. Who are the data owners? What are the transformation rules? Without data lineage, these functions are irrelevant. So it makes sense for a business to have a clear understanding where data comes from, who uses, and how it transforms. Also, when there is a change to the environment, it's valuable to access the impacts to the enterprise application landscape. With that in mind, I'm gonna ask Tim Gasper to tell us how data lineage happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Thais, for your introduction there. And what I'll do here is I'll actually go ahead and share my screen. So Thais, if you can unshare, then it'll let me share mine. All right. All right, cool. So that should be working now. So what I wanted to do here, and thank you, Thais, is actually talk a little bit about some of the key data lineage use cases and some of the key business value that we see over at Data.World, as well as Manta and Ernie, our special guest, sees quite frequently over at Manta, right? And we'll soon introduce a little bit more about our respective technologies and how it actually solves these problems. And so data lineage, as you heard, right, has to do a lot with understanding how data is flowing, how it affects other things, both upstream and downstream, right? And as our data environments become more complex and have more pieces, it becomes harder and harder to really be able to understand and introspect how our data is flowing, why it's flowing, and where it's going, right? And so 4 of the key use cases are, first of all, source and provenance. When you're actually going and looking for data or trying to understand data, typically the first and foremost thing that happens is that you need context. You want to understand, where did this come from, what created it, what types of data resulted in it, so that you can have that context, so that you can have confidence in understanding what the data is, that you can trust it, that you feel good about the quality of that data, as well as when there are issues, the ability to troubleshoot it, right? So source and provenance is really important. Where did this come from? Where did it come from? And the second use case is around impact analysis and forecasting, right? So whereas source and provenance is about where did it come from so that I could have confidence and trust, impact analysis and forecasting is, now I'm a person who's in charge of an upstream system, let's say a database or a legacy system, and we're about to make some sort of a change, or we're going to make, maybe we recently experienced some downtime or some issues, and we need to know what is impacted downstream, right? And so that kind of impact analysis is also really critical to ensure that pipelines can be trusted, that you can ensure sort of company SLAs, and that you know who to contact as a manager of these different systems, or who to notify to let them know that there's going to be an impact, that there's going to be some downtime, or whatever the problem might be. The third key use case is very similar, right? Except in this case is the people that are more downstream. So let's say, somebody who owns a particular dashboard, let's say it's a Tableau dashboard, and all of a sudden that dashboard stops working, right? Or all of a sudden the data starts to look different than you expected. And you're like, well, that's not great. Like, I don't understand why this isn't working. I didn't change anything, right? It's still working the way that I originally configured it. What went wrong? And so being able to do that kind of troubleshooting requires you to be able to know what is upstream, what might have changed upstream, and who do I contact to be able to understand more, right? So that becomes very important for this sort of troubleshooting and root cause use case. And then finally, risk and sensitive data is sort of the fourth key use case here. And, it ties in a little bit into the other 3 use cases in the sense that, it has to do with understanding the upstream and downstream impacts and movement of data, but specifically focused around personal data or sensitive data. And especially in today's landscape of GDPR and CCPA, and many other types of industry and governmental regulation, it becomes very important to make sure that we're protecting the privacy rights of the different people that we're interacting with as a business, as well as ensuring that we're covering our risks, right? That we want to make sure that we are in compliance. And in order to do that, you need to understand where these different pieces of data live, but also how they flow. So something like an email address or a social security number, what reports are using that? What transformations are happening? If we're doing things like anonymization or tokenization, those are transformations. Where are those transformations happening, and are they being done successfully, right? So these are all important factors, and all 4 of these use cases end up being really critical to both having the capability to understand the lineage of your data, as well as technology and tools that let you do that. And just to kind of loop you in, Ernie, is there anything that you would add from your side, and some of the things that you see over at Manta that you would add to some of these different use cases?
Oh, thank you, Tim. These are certainly the key ones that are pressing on all of our customers' minds. There are a few derivatives of them that are also appearing and showing up now, in that when people want to have better management of their entire IT organization, obviously troubleshooting and root cause are a big piece of that, as well as all the other use cases. We're also seeing a big one around migrations and modernization, wanting to be able to come out with a scope if they are looking at moving a legacy application up to the cloud. How many of the procedures do they really need? Which of the reports that are most critical? And I have sites that find that legacy models that they spent, enormous amounts of resources to build And they find that today they have tables that are not even being accessed by any of their current reports. And so there's no point in, lifting all of that in a heavyweight migration, but they can use Lineage to really scope it.
That's a really, really good point. And I think we see this often too in some of our catalog customers, and that, they may be moving to the cloud, and, especially, Data.World being a cloud SaaS sort of provider, a lot of times we're part of a larger digital transformation or cloud migration initiative. And a lot of times, first of all, they're trying to boil the ocean with those migrations. And then they realize, okay, cool, that was not a good idea. We're not going to try to boil the ocean. But then it becomes a question of what do we prioritize, right? And so Lineage ends up being really key to understand not just sort of what's being used so that you can bring it into that new environment, but also, all the sorts of different transformations and things that are happening to the data, so that when you do move to that new environment, you're not all of a sudden losing a bunch of functionality that you thought was already taken care of, but you actually needed to make sure you included in scope.
It's a great way to keep the two in sync, right? While you're building new extraction, transformation, loading programs, for example, using some different technology, you can go back and make sure the lineage is the same for the two.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so that gives you all a taste of some of the different use cases that are super relevant in this sort of data lineage landscape. And if we move to the next slide here, I wanted to call out that we really see there being two levels of lineage that really become important to the business. Because you can imagine, as you start to connect to and create the lineage around a lot of these different sources, for a lot of good reasons, you should collect as much lineage as possible, right? You want to have a very comprehensive view of how data is moving through your systems, about how things are being leveraged and what transformations are happening. But you don't necessarily want to expose all that information to all users at all times. That can be very overwhelming. I like to kind of use the analogy sometimes of like looking up at the stars in the sky, right? If there's all these stars and all these things, right, and there's all these constellations, that can be very overwhelming to kind of be like, oh my gosh, what am I looking at here, right? And so you might want to start by kind of looking at the sectors of the sky, or just the constellations, not the stars themselves, right? Or maybe let's start with the planets, right? And so similarly, if you kind of extend that analogy over to sort of data lineage, when we talk about from a technology standpoint, is that sometimes people really want to have more of a system level view or a higher level view of lineage, right? And this is focused more on the needs of sort of your data consumer class. These are your business analysts, maybe your stewards or your managers and executives. And these people want to have context and trust. They want to know that it's coming from this data warehouse. They want to know that, is this raw data or is this heavily transformed data? Are there dashboards that are using this that maybe are already in the catalog, so I can understand what those are and kind of refer to them? And we'll show this in a minute in the demos. But they're not necessarily looking into more details. But the second that they then need to do some deeper troubleshooting or some root cause or some impact analysis, or they want to trace how a particular sensitive field is traveling through the whole lineage, things start to get more complicated, and you need to have that more detailed view so you can start to do that tracing, so that way you can have a much deeper and more powerful capability, right? And this is kind of more that technical lineage, right? This is where you're focused on the needs of a broader set of personas, and especially giving people who are more technical a very strong engine, a strong capability to be able to do that deep troubleshooting and that deep analysis. And without previewing too much, because I think the demos will really speak for themselves, the combination of Data.World and Manta really provides that sort of best of breed solution where you can get those high level views and you can get those technical views in both of our systems in a way that really sort of gives you the right level of detail at the right time and provides you the best way to approach those four plus a couple, if you think about migration and things like that, these different use cases, right? So just to give you an example of a couple of these things before we start jumping into these demos, first of all, this concept of high-level data lineage, right, is one where you want to understand what are the source systems. You want to understand what are the key tables that are happening that allow those different things to come to fruition, right? Some of them might be tables, some of them might be views that have been derived upon tables, right? Where relevant, there might be some high-level key transformations that make sense to expose at this level, but you want to be careful not to overexpose, right? Because a lot of times transformations can have many, many steps. And we don't necessarily want to overwhelm the consumers when we're talking about high-level data lineage, right? And then what's really key is what are the downstream assets, right? Because if you're thinking about catalog, you're often thinking of sort of an enterprise data marketplace, and you're creating these data products that people can leverage and sort of shop for and get access to that are leveraging these different pieces of data. And so really the service here of high-level lineage is to give you enough context to understand where this data is coming from, how it's being used, and whether or not you can be confident and be able to trust in it, right? An example of what this looks like on a page is here, and we'll actually see this in the demo, and you can see that where high-level lineage is most effective is when it's being displayed in context, so that way you can then compare it to the other metadata that's being captured, and it provides just that right level of information around sources and transformations and destinations to give you the context you need. And if this is all you need, that's great. But as you heard us mention, a lot of times you need to be able to do that deeper use case as a drill down, as a deep dive, all right? And you also may wonder, well, how do you actually collect the information that powers a high-level data lineage visualization? And Ernie will talk more in a minute about the power of Manta's technology and how that's able to sort of generate this lineage. But needless to say, being able to combine something like Manta with data.world is what allows this kind of this lineage information to be displayed. So it's not just information that we're able to sort of readily collect from services like Tableau and things like that that have that lineage already available via APIs, but actually goes a few steps much deeper and allows you to get a much more detailed level of lineage. And when you're trying to do those more advanced use cases and when you need that deeper view, technical data lineage really becomes a key part of that, right? And this technical lineage is obviously focused on those broader use cases and some of those more technical roles, and provides a detailed, granular ability to maybe start at that high level, start at that system level, but then very quickly drill into the columns and be able to do tracing and see what are the ETL workflows, what are the stored procedures, maybe even what does the code look like that's making these transformations. And we'll get to see a little bit more about that in a moment. I don't know if Ernie, you want to preview anything right now, or if you want to save it for later.
I will save it later, but you already can see that being able to get deeper into technical lineage requires color coding and things that kind of really make it easier to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking forward to kind of showing you all this live. So at this point, what we want to do is actually dive into a couple of demos. And so first of all, I'll go ahead and demonstrate a little bit about data.world and how the data catalog is leveraging lineage as a core part of its capabilities, and especially the high-level lineage, which is put in context in these different pages. And then we'll show how that bridges into the more technical lineage views with Manta, and we'll hand it off to Ernie to talk a little bit about what Manta's capabilities are. So without further ado, I will hop out of this screen here and hop into data.world. And so when you go into data.world, one of the first things that you notice, if you haven't seen sort of a demo of our catalog before, is that it's a very different enterprise software experience than you may be used to. First and foremost, we are a cloud-hosted solution with both multi-tenant and single-tenant options, where we do all the hosting and the management for you. So there's no worry about sort of installing things on servers. There's no worry about sort of the update rate, right? We're constantly pushing up updates and changes and new features, so you automatically get access to the latest and greatest with just a refresh of the browser. And it's very much designed with a social and collaborative experience in mind. This here is the home feed, where it's basically set up a lot like you might see like Facebook, right? Where you've got a set of recommendations and a set of information being displayed to you, so that you can browse serendipitously across the people that you follow, the organizations that you're a part of, and always within the security of what you're allowed to see, right? Because as part of this social experience is also sort of the governance and the security controls that ensure that you only see the things that you should. On the left-hand side, you can see these different groups like DemoCorp Analyst, DemoCorp Marketing. These are all different groups, and to continue that Facebook analogy, you can kind of think of these as like Facebook groups, right? You've got different subsets of people and information or there's certain content that only should be relevant to those particular users. There's certain collaboration that only makes sense for those particular users. And each one of these has a dedicated feed where, for example, I can see what Rachel Williams is doing, one of our data scientists, as a fellow analyst in the analyst department, right? And here you can see an example of a page, a social page, where everyone has followers and following and bookmarks, and all of the different data sets that they care about the most and use the most can be displayed. So first of all, you can see how this is a very social experience. Second of all is more the browsing experience, right? And so here I'll open up this left-hand side nav for a second. You know, similar to a traditional data catalog or a catalog in like a library, right? We want to have, give you that ability to sort of have a browse experience as well. And so you can do things like browse by data, browse by analysis, like dashboards or projects or use cases, as well as glossary terms, right? Things like calculations or metrics or different things that that are key for you to be able to then be related to those different tables and columns and dashboards, but represent higher level concepts. And we'll show examples of a glossary item in a second. And then obviously things like notifications, right? You want to know when people are requesting access to things, right? There's a whole agile governance aspect. You want to know when people are suggesting changes to things. And so that all has to do with notifications and workflow, which is integrated into data.world. But let's imagine here that Bob is an analyst, and he's particularly trying to answer a business question around shipping profitability. And if there's anything sort of we can do in terms of some new promotions or some maybe even free shipping to become more competitive around our shipping. But we got to make sure that we can handle that as a business. And one of the things that I'm very interested in as part of that process is to understand lineage so that I can know the context of that data. And maybe if there's problems with dashboards or problems with reports, to be able to very quickly figure out who to talk to resolve some of those issues. And so what I'll do is I'll actually go and type in order, because order data is what I want to sort of base this shipping profitability analysis off of. And you can see here I get into our search interface. Because I chose such a high-level term, you know, what's going to get hit a lot in that kind of instance are especially things like glossary terms, because usually when you're searching for something relatively simple, what you're trying to do is gain an understanding of what does this even mean in our business, and therefore what pieces of data should I leverage. And you can see that I could easily filter by things like, let me see only approved assets, let me see assets that are only owned by specific people or have specific levels of confidentiality, or filter even by, you know, different asset types such as data or, you know, even comments. What are people saying about order information? I'll go ahead and click order, which is the first item here, and I'll be able to see and learn a lot more about what order means in our organization. So part of, you know, lineage at a very high level is also sort of the lineage of meaning, the lineage of abstract representation, right? And so at our company, order really represents a purchase transaction where somebody has actually committed to the purchase in an online or electronic channel. So they've hit that buy now button. And it's important to then disambiguate that from other representations or meanings for this. So things like a delivered order or paid order or fulfilled order, right? So first of all, creating that clarity and allowing me to know that this is the concept that I want to center around, and what I want to sort of find sort of data lineage and information lineage around is a first key, right? And you can see that all sorts of different metadata can be associated with any of these pages, whether it's a glossary or a data table. So for example, here you can see we have a calculation field. We have a PII field that lets me know that there is often PII associated with orders, and so on and so forth. I can also see relationships associated with this. And so I can see, for example, that there's some Tableau dashboards that are using and are related to this business term, as well as data. But the next step here is really I want to find data, and I want to actually understand more about the data lineage. And so what I'll do is I'll click on retail order here, and I can see that this is a table. It is in our Snowflake data warehouse. Similarly to that previous page, I have all sorts of metadata available. And all this metadata is customizable by our enterprise customers. So these can be tailored to your specific sort of informational and governance needs. I can learn about sort of all the different columns and information that is a part of this table, and very clearly see that that this is the information that I want to take advantage of. I even can see little indicators of what the quality might be of some of these columns. So for example, I see this little red dot here by event ID. And I can click that and I can see that, okay, interesting. There's actually a warning here that there's an inconsistent application. So you can see how data quality actually kind of comes to play here in data governance. But now what I want to do is I want to understand that lineage of where this came from, right? And so if I scroll down here, I can see this high-level lineage view where it was automatically populated based on our integration to this system and leveraging Manta under the hood to calculate some of that more detailed lineage. And so I can see that upstream, we've got some different tables that are being combined together to create some downstream views. And so this retail order is actually a refined view of some of these different upstream systems that is then being leveraged. And we can see that because it's sort of on the right-hand side here, that it actually is a more distilled view that is more of a downstream view that probably means it's been sort of normalized or denormalized in some way. It's been made a little bit more analytics ready. Maybe it's been joined with a couple other things. And it's clear that based on these two dashboards that this particular table is being leveraged actively in different kinds of analysis. And the first types of sort of lineage that makes sense for me to explore may be to actually explore those two downstream analyses to kind of understand what they are and what they represent. And so if I do something like click product here, I can actually learn a little bit more about this dashboard, even click to access it directly in Tableau itself. I can see a preview of it and so on and so forth. Now imagine, we talked about some of those different lineage use cases. So obviously this high-level lineage provides me a good understanding of sort of some of the downstream usage, gives me a lot of that sort of source and provenance understanding. But imagine I looked at one of those dashboards and it was broken. Or imagine that I'm a little bit worried about the fact that it's got some PII associated with it. And I want to understand sort of how that's being leveraged and whether or not I need to contact our security team or our compliance team to get additional permissions. Or imagine I took off my analyst hat and now I have a different hat on now. Maybe I'm one of the owners of those upstream systems, or I'm on our security and governance teams. I may have some different questions that I really need to introspect on. And so in order to answer some of these more detailed questions, I really need a more detailed view of lineage to power that. And so one of the things that we do is that we automatically generate deep links into a technical lineage view, which is powered by Manta. And I'll actually show that here where you can see the technical lineage line item that's been automatically generated. And I click view in technical lineage view. And if my session didn't expire, that would automatically just pop me right in. And now it takes me directly to that exact same table within Manta so that I can now do much more detailed introspection on the lineage of this, right? And start to click in and start to understand about these fields and about this table and these systems in a lot more detail. But before I do that, I actually want to hop back over to the presentation and show off a Manta slide and then kind of hand it off to Ernie to introduce a little bit more about Manta and start to kick off a more detailed demo of the power of this technical lineage capability that really is under the hood here and is exposed through this really capable UI. So without further ado, I will hop back over to here and pull up that slide. And then Ernie, I'll let you drive from here.
Terrific, thanks, Tim. So a question that always comes up when we're speaking with our customers and prospects is, how does this all work? And so what Manta does specifically is comb through your code, your actual code in your SQL stored procedures, the metadata that's coming out of your ETL tools like DataStage and Informatica and Microsoft SSIS, the business intelligence code that's sitting in places like Tableau or Cognos, etc. And we're looking through that, picking out individual select statements and insert statements and transformation activities, the way that the columns actually flow into each other and get renamed along the way. And so as we're doing that, we're documenting a lineage in the process along the way, and then visualizing that lineage in an interactive map, either directly for the details as Tim has outlined, or pushing it directly into data.world. And ultimately, completing this picture by looking only at the code itself. So with that, let's take a look directly at the tool itself. So Tim, I'll go ahead and share. And let me maximize my environment here. And go ahead and do the same with my browser. Okay, so what we're looking at here is the repository viewer for Manta after we've gone out and done all that crunching of your code. Now, in my example here, I've got just about every technology that we support of all those different flavors that we spoke about. A typical site is probably going to have some, subset of these. And what we're doing is illustrating that metadata in its natural hierarchy, whatever that might be. This happens to be Microsoft SQL Server, and we see databases and schemas, and there's tables beneath them. Same thing is going to be true for any of these typical hierarchies that we might be familiar with. What I'm going to show you in this situation for the use cases we've described is I'm going to start with a report. And this could be the report that an analyst is concerned about because they don't like the numbers. And so they really want to, really reach into that source and provenance use case that Tim spoke about to understand and get some trust of where this data actually came from. And by the same token, also look at both the root cause analysis use cases and the impact analysis use cases that might come out of the owners of this particular report or the developers that are putting it together. So you select a particular object, you can double click it or drag it over here if that is appropriate. But then you set up what you want for your first view of lineage and go ahead and hit visualize. Now what it's doing is it's rendering this diagram by going into the graph database that we keep for all the lineage that we've been parsing from your source code. And it gives you this first view of that lineage diagram where you see some of the colors and things that Tim was showing you earlier. Now this is important because lineage can get very complicated, and we're always endeavoring to make lineage easier to consume. And so one of the first places we like to do that is to give you some color coding to understand where you are. If you only have 2 or 3 objects, it may not be important. But if you have 10, 20, 30, maybe many more, maybe hundreds of objects on the page, an initial way to understand which pieces you're looking at, or the analogy that Tim spoke of earlier, which constellation do you want to look at to start, is important. So you can see we do a lot of color coding. This one's fairly obvious. Everything in this color here is identified as Oracle. Over here we see some, in this case, Informatica, ETL, and everything else in here is actually Microsoft SQL Server. And I'll show you a little bit more of that in just a second. But it's easy to get lost. We don't want you to be lost. So you can always center yourself back at the start node, where the start node, as you can see in this color, is the object that you began your lineage on. It's kind of like you're standing on an island and you're looking at lineage from that point of view. In this case, customers is a report, and so everything is upstream. Now, the next thing that needs to happen is that we can drill deeper. So you have the opportunity to go into, in this case, detailed columns, and then take this color paradigm even farther. So that if you click on a particular column within a lineage, you can actually see where you are while you're performing that research. And the same is true if I look up here a little bit farther and I say, oh, here's a stored procedure. This is the body of that stored procedure. I'm going to expand it also. And if I decide I'm going to put my focus over here for a moment, this one turns yellow, where everything is upstream in that color, everything downstream is in this color. So again, doing everything we can to help you focus your point of research. If I expand this particular table, we can take a look at some of the detailed transformations that occur, especially important in the root cause analysis scenario. It's a simple example, of course, but if I want to know how a number was derived or a mathematical expression, what Manta is doing is looking across all those different code types and samples and programs, and whether it's Java or ETL or SQL, we're going to bring up and surface the actual transformations. Now visually, I can see that the full name is actually calculated by bringing together the family name and the first name. But if I wanted to see the actual syntax of that, I can do so by looking at this detailed metadata window and see the expression itself, or if I needed to document that expression, I could certainly grab it out directly and see what that calculation truly looks like. In the scenario where I want to do impact analysis, I might be a DBA who's looking at a particular table like this one here for REP_client, and I can actually pivot, if you will, the lineage diagram, almost like you think of doing a spreadsheet, and switch this to become the primary point, right? So when you're standing on that island, you're looking at lineage from that point of view. So we're only seeing REP_client as it's known to customers' lineage. But if I restart the visualization for this element, it will now reflect what's going downstream, and maybe there's more reports. This is particularly important in those situations with data privacy. We might not know all the different places where my data is being splashed to. So we have to look at it from both places. So we can see there's this customer report, but there's dozens of views out here. There's 3, okay. But there's many more views that are coming out of this REP_client looking downstream, and those are other things I might need to investigate. One other critical part of the aspects of lineage is to understand lineage history. So one of the things that Manta does is keep time slices of your lineage. And you know, any of us that have been into the business intelligence space have had that scenario where an analyst comes into our office with their hair on fire and says, I have to know how this report was calculated last September or last week or last month or 2 quarters ago. And so we can come in here and look at an element that we call a revision, which is a time slice for whenever that metadata is analyzed, and go back in time and just look at the lineage and examine it just like we just did before for that particular point in time. But perhaps even more valuable is to be able to do this as a comparison and to compare 2 revisions to actually see, especially in now the root cause analysis use case or situations where we need to actually see what went wrong or what was right that is not wrong now. I can go back and actually do a comparison for the lineage, and in this case go back to a point November of 2018 for that same customer report. And so now, make a slight change to one of my filters, I'm going to run a comparison. And what this does is changes the color recognition just slightly, such that everything that is the same for this particular report across these 2 periods is going to show up in gray, and everything that is new is in green. But we have the opportunity to highlight what has changed in the lineage path over time, such that everything in red is what occurred 18 months ago, and everything in green is the current revision of today. And again, this answers also a lot of these different use cases, depending on what we're trying to find. They were even looking for a breach that occurred a long time ago, and we want to know exactly what was used, perhaps which code or which constellation actually caused that breach to occur. Tim, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just to chime in on that last bit there, every time I see that comparison analysis, it gives me some chills a little bit, because I know how much time a lot of teams spend trying to do that kind of analysis, sometimes never really getting to an answer that makes sense, right?
Absolutely.
So the ability to see sort of what was added, what was removed, and do that at sort of different time slices, different time points is really powerful. And I think it speaks a little bit sort of to the unique way that you all have approached sort of lineage collection and automated sort of stitching at Manta, where you're kind of taking these snapshots across all your systems, and those become sort of those key cohesive revisions. And it really allows you to do that kind of analysis, whereas other approaches would maybe not make that not so easy.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, no problem. And let me go ahead and share my screen again here. We've got just a couple of slides left, and then we'll switch over to Q&A. So let me go ahead and go into presentation mode. And so for the sort of 2 final slides here to kind of wrap things up, is one a little bit of an architecture slide just to get you sort of oriented, especially for the more technical folks who are on the call, like how does this fit into my underlying architecture? And then just something to kind of pull it all together. So, you know, really what we see and what we're super excited about with this partnership with Manta and the ability to really embed it into the solutions that we're providing our customers is that you get sort of this powerful data cataloging solution built in the cloud for the cloud that has sort of built-in high-level lineage capability that's going to serve you know, a variety of sort of users that are really trying to get that context and that trust and want to see that lineage side by side with the other metadata. And what we're doing when we power that kind of data catalog is that we're connecting to different data sources through what we call our metadata collectors. And those metadata collectors are pulling in that information on a scheduled basis or ad hoc basis into our graph database, into the knowledge graph, and automatically hooking it into the rest of the catalog, right? And so that's a process that's happening ongoing all the time. We also have the ability to do live connections and live virtualization so that in addition to being able to sort of pull in more advanced metadata because you have that live connection, being able to do things like actually allow you to provision access and query the data directly, right? So you can imagine for a lot of different analysis use cases being able to do that. And by bringing Manta into the fold here, what you're getting are a couple of things. First of all, you're getting this automated lineage collection and code analysis, where now you're getting really great cross-database stitching, automatically being able to tie together how these different pieces of system lineage and transformation lineage combine together to create that sort of that revision, that combined view. And you're also getting a technical lineage UI capability so that as you need to be able to not just have the high level lineage, but also be able to drill down and have a really powerful ability to do that impact analysis, that root cause analysis, to do things like tracing different pieces of PII and sensitive data and do revision comparisons, that you can do that through a UI that was really designed for and enables that, which is a very dedicated type of experience, right? So this is kind of the big picture, the whole picture that enables this architecture that allows you to connect into your different systems and create this holistic catalog plus lineage capability. And when we talk about, you know, really bringing all that that value together and bridging the gap, you know, at Data.World, we talk a lot about what we call the data meaning gap. And this is where, you know, a lot of times, no matter if you've made big investments in self-service analytics, made big investments in AI and machine learning, you still have this big gap between the sort of accessibility and the meaningfulness of data to be able to act on it quickly, to understand it well, and to actually put it to use, right? Data value is lacking in this scenario. And that's where we really see tools that can come into play, right? It's not just about the tools, it's people and process, but technology can play a key role here to provide that inventory so you have visibility, to provide that lineage so you're able to see how data is flowing, as well as provide things like glossary capabilities, governance capabilities, that enterprise data marketplace, as well as an open data marketplace, which is something unique about Data.World. And then finally, access to the data itself, right? Because finding data, understanding about data is a part of the puzzle, but then being able to access it is the last key piece. And if you can't request access and you can't, you know, get provisioned access, you know, you're still creating a bottleneck, right? You're still creating data breadlines. And then finally, lineage is this very important piece. And so by leveraging a combined solution with Data.World and Manta, you're able to do these source and provenance use cases and understand context, to do impact analysis so that people upstream and the owners of different systems can know what they might be affecting downstream, to do troubleshooting when things go wrong, so that way you don't spend cycles and cycles and cycles reacting instead of being able to be proactive and be on offense in your data strategy. And then finally, risk and sensitive data, right? Things like GDPR and CCPA are super relevant. And I heard recently that the CCPA is pushing their timeline of when they're going to actually do all their enforcements by a little bit. So we get to all chew our nails a little bit longer and see what the suspense is going to be. But, you know, it's very important for us to be able to have the right tools that help us to address these different things. So that's really the big picture here. And with that, I think we want to try to spend the rest of the time here to answer some of your different questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Tim and Ernie, for the demos and the explanations. That was very helpful. If you don't get a chance to comment or to get your responses today, please join us for Catalog and Cocktails next week, July 1st. We're going to have a special guest, Ernie, and we're going to have a chance to talk a little bit more about data lineage. With that in mind, I'm going to ask the first question that we got from Devanch. He's asking, how does data.world works exactly? Does it get directly connect to sites like Tableau, Snowflake, and keeps out to sync in real time, or is it more a manual work?
That's a great question. And that architecture slide may have helped solve that a little bit for you, but I'll add a little bit more detail in that in general, when we're integrating with different data sources, there are three primary ways you can do so. And in the metadata context, it's really two that are the most important. First of all is what we call our metadata collectors. And so these are a process which you can implement in the cloud or in your on-premise environment. And it's directly connecting to that system, and it's pulling in a read-only way all the important metadata that you want to bring into your catalog. And so whether you run that on an ad hoc basis or on a scheduled basis, that's collecting that metadata. It's putting it into graph format, and then it's uploading it into the data.world environment, so that way it becomes a part of your catalog. So those crawlers, those collectors can integrate with a variety of different systems. And for systems that we don't support, we have a really great sort of framework by which to create new integrations very quickly, as well as SDKs and APIs. And so integration is usually pretty easy. For those live connections, obviously we have more of the sort of collectors than we do the live connections, but the live connections are especially valuable in cases where you've got a data warehouse, or you've got some sort of a system where people are doing a lot of their analytics and their queries, and maybe a large number or a large body of your analyses live. And in those cases, we actually have a dedicated virtualization connector that can go and connect to those different sources. And we have a variety of secure methods to do those connections. And so, for example, we have a bridge that you can implement in your own cloud or your own on-premise data center that only does outbound connections, so that way you can be confident that that it's always coming from within your firewall as opposed to coming outbound and coming in. So there's a variety of different ways to kind of set these things up to make sure that you feel comfortable. But those are the two primary ways. The third way is actually we have the ability to ETL data in, but usually in metadata use cases, the ETLing of data is less important.
Thank you. The next question came from Ravi. They're asking if the lineage covers multiple regulatory data privacy frameworks like GDPR, CCPA, and any other future data regulations.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I'll start, and then Ernie, you probably have a lot more that you can say here. Is that I think that when you are addressing things like GDPR and CCPA and a lot of these different regulations, it's a multi-pronged approach, right? You've got processes you're putting in place. You've got various people and functions that you're setting up and audit processes, but you're also trying to use tools and technology to help with that. And lineage is definitely a big part of that puzzle that's going to help you do that.
Yeah, and in particular, from a GDPR perspective, what we're finding companies are doing, whether they're using technology to discover privacy-oriented data, or if they are just aware of it on their own, being able to connect the dots is what becomes critical. They know that they have name, address, or national identifier information that's sitting in a database in London, and some of it's sitting over in Hong Kong and elsewhere in New York, perhaps. But then they want to know how it actually flows between those places. And that's a big deal. It's not just a matter of recognizing it, but actually, how does it flow between those locations, and what's its history?
Thanks, that's good to know. And now Rhonda is asking, what are the predecessors and foundation needed for data lineage? Glossary, dictionary, and how is that all populated?
Yeah, Ernie, do you want to take that and then I'll add to it?
Yeah, I think mostly when we talk about how is it populated is by going out and actually scanning source code, right? Bringing it in for its samples, putting it into a syntax tree and making sense of it. But it's interesting the way this question is worded, Rhonda. It's the influence on a glossary or dictionary becomes very important, right? Glossary components can then point to elements that are in the data pipeline. And it either becomes a doorway right? Because I've referenced a particular asset, identified it with a business term. That might be the original search through data.world, how I arrive at that. But then someone wants to get the lineage from there. So it's the connection to the objects that are in lineage, and that's the way we reconcile and really get the value between data.world and Manta.
Yeah,
Good.
100% agreed. And sorry, Ty, just to add to that really quick is that I feel like this also goes a lot to questions around automation, right? And I think that there's a lot of lineage solutions out there in the market that aren't as automated, and you need to do a bunch of tagging or adding tracers and things like that into your code and things like that to really get the lineage to show up, or maybe you're manually kind of connecting the dots later, right? And I think one of the important pieces about the approach that Manta takes and that is bundled into the catalog solution for data.world is analyzing that information from code, applying different business logic, and then being able to stitch that across databases in an automated fashion, because that allows it to be much lower manual effort and allows you to do it sooner. So it's not like you've got to set up all your dictionaries and your glossary and everything before you can even benefit from lineage. You can actually bring lineage capabilities earlier in sort of your overall cataloging initiative.
Thanks. The other question that we have is, can data lineage be applied to an existing catalog solution after it has been already implemented?
Sorry, can you repeat that question one more time, Taizi?
Can data lineage be applied to an existing catalog solution after it has been already implemented?
Got it. Yeah, so the answer to that is yes. You know, in the way that, especially in the way that we've integrated with Manta, is that, you know, obviously you can start to be collecting metadata. You can start to, you know, create your glossary terms, create data sets and projects, and start that experience. And when you're ready, you could always add sort of Manta lineage capabilities later. And one of the nice things about having a graph-based backend and sort of this knowledge graph approach is that we then create those relationships after the fact and make sure that it fits into sort of the way that you've already deployed a catalog, right? So it can certainly be a progression. That being said, there's a lot of reasons why it's beneficial to have lineage be a part of the solution earlier in the process too. And so that's something that, you know, depending on your use case is something to look at to make sure you're getting as much value early on as possible. Good.
There is another question that came from Raymond. He's asking about how do we explore data option in data.world through virtualization? Is the entire content of the table sent to the cloud?
That's a really great question. And, you know, one of the unique aspects, obviously, of data.world is the fact that we have this virtualization capability. It's also a federated virtualization capability, which means you can join data from multiple virtualized sources in a single query. You know, really the way that we approach sort of virtualization is that you can pick and choose which tables and which views and which columns you want to bring into data.world. And so you have the ability to configure that. And on top of that, where, you know, if data.world's configuration doesn't meet your needs, there's a lot that you can do on the database side to kind of control sort of what that user can do. And so depending on those two different things, you can usually control sort of what tables you want to see, whether it's for a curation purpose or maybe it's for a security purpose.
We have time for one more question, and it came from Shri. He's asking, how does data.world differ from other tools available in the space?
That's a really great question. I think, you know, there's a lot of resources that we could provide and additional information on this, but the really quick of it is that, you know, we are really focused on being a cloud-first solution. And so we're in the cloud, we're SaaS, we're pushing updates sometimes multiple times a week. And so we're really trying to push the envelope and innovate quickly and be something that's really fast and easy to work with, right? And so I think that's one of the primary things there. Collaboration is also a very key centerpiece, which you kind of saw in the demo, and sort of the different capabilities that you get with that underlying knowledge graph, whether that's the intelligence and the machine learning and sort of recommendations that we can do, or being able to integrate with things like Manta and have that become a part of the knowledge graph in a really seamless way. I think one additional thing to add there, just in the context of this webinar, is that when you choose a solution like data.world, you know, and we're bringing in a partner like Manta, you're getting a best of breed solution that is the best at cataloging and the best at lineage. And I think sometimes when you're looking at other solutions out in the market, you may have to make some trade-offs about, oh, well, they're not as good at something, or they're, better at another thing. And I think that, when you're choosing Manta and Data.World, what you're really getting is, we have a kind of a phrase internally where we say, we want to provide the best damn data catalog, right? And I really look at something like Manta as the best damn lineage solution, right? So these two things combined together is a really powerful thing.
All right, and with that, we conclude our webinar. There are other questions here that we're gonna address. And we also are looking forward to seeing you next week, where we can talk more and discuss data lineage in details. Thank you very much. See you next month.
Thank you, everyone.